transfer window has finally closed and Newcastle United can get on with their season. It's been a long summer, a difficult summer, but it has come to an end with Alexander Isak all but signed for Liverpool at the time of recording. Yoane Wissa coming into Newcastle. In today's episode of NUFC Transfer Daily, a deadline day special, we'll be getting into it all, so let's do that. Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Before we get going, please do hit subscribe and like. I appreciate all your support over this exhaustive summer that is finally over, but I'm really excited to take the channel to the next level thanks to so many of you guys subscribing. It's going to reach new heights that I wasn't even expecting. Thank you so much to everybody who's done so far. If you haven't already, please do, as I say, hit subscribe and like on this video because it really helps. I did sit down this morning and do my usual slot, and I recorded about Alexander Isak and the news that broke at midnight last night that the deal had been agreed with Liverpool. I woke up to that news, and then as I was recording and editing, Fabrizio Romano dropped the news that here we go, a deal was agreed for Yoane Wissa to come to Newcastle. So I did a quick update on that, a quick pod bomb intersection like I did yesterday, and I was about to upload it and I thought, this doesn't quite feel right. I may as well wait to see what happens later on, see if anything else happens in terms of maybe a midfielder, a surprise, potential signing, or any surprise outgoings. And then the Will Osula news dropped that Eintracht Frankfurt want to sign him for around £30 million, which has taken everybody's heads off, really, I think, because that is potentially 3 times the amount of money Newcastle paid for Osula last summer, and he's only made one Premier League start, and that was on Saturday against Leeds. And as I said in my review of that game the other day, he didn't impress. So that is an excellent deal if it gets confirmed. As I say, none of these deals at the moment, as I record, maybe as I'm recording, or certainly by the time you're watching this, I'm sure they all are. Alexander Isak, by all accounts, is done, just not announced. It's on all those pictures and everything, and those are the things that hold up these deals. Yoane Wissa, I'm imagining, is very similar. There's no deal sheets gone in for these transfers, and if you don't know what a deal sheet is, basically you sign it between 5 and 7 o'clock, and it allows an extra 2 hours to get deals done that may need a little bit of extra time in terms of paperwork and medicals and things. None of that has gone in for Newcastle or Liverpool, so these two deals look like they are good to go. So we'll start with Alexander Isak, and as I say, yesterday the news emerged. I wrote an article that's in the description. It's probably very, very not worth reading anymore because it basically just explains how Newcastle got to this point where they were willing to sell Isak, because the whole summer the message had been he wasn't for sale, and there was 2 conditions of sale that needed to be met: £150 million and 2 strikers in, a replacement for Callum Wilson, which is what Yoane Wissa is, and obviously Nick Woltemade, who came in the other day. But at the time that I was recording, at the time that news broke, it was a little bit nervy because there was this sense that Newcastle had bottled it. There was criticism from the fans that they hadn't got what they fully wanted price-wise, and also they hadn't got a replacement in. And I was in the middle of that conversation, and then, as I say, Yoane Wissa, the news dropped, £55 million package, 50 million with 5 million in add-ons. Wissa was coming through, and then it really made sense that Newcastle had really done the deal for Isak, and that domino had fallen, allowing them the money to go and spend on Yoane Wissa. So both deals are pretty much done. But the Isak situation as well, it was never going to be a case of 150 million in reality. I think that was always the message that came through, even though Newcastle were adamant by the sounds of it, even though they never actually said 150 million, they were adamant about their price, which we know was pretty much 150. I mean, that was the number that was just a sort of magical figure, back in the spring, just to kind of put every team off, and it worked for the majority. But Liverpool saw an opportunity, sensed an opportunity, and got the deal done and pushed forward. And because they were the only team that was bidding, because there was no bidding war, that's what drives the price up. 150 million was always going to be very, very difficult because they set their stall out for 120 million. And I know lots of people, rightly, and I think I've made this point as well, have said that Moises Caicedo went for 115, Declan Rice went for 105 or whatever. Florian Wirtz coming in as a talented player from the Bundesliga, 116, the previous British record, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments on that. But now Isak is the British record holder, or he will be once it's announced. But the idea of getting his actual value, which I still think is 150 million, was always going to be difficult because nobody else was bidding, no one else was putting pressure on Liverpool, and Liverpool were able to just say that they were going to bid that money or not. And obviously the mood change that happened after the Liverpool game because of this meeting that Isak had with the board before the game. Basically, I think that was a last attempt to try and find a way forward this season, trying to reintegrate him, because that was always the plan. As I say, Newcastle didn't want to sell him. They had those high expectations, and they said as much in their statement responding to Isak's statement. We don't have to go over it all, but that was when the moment changed. As soon as that didn't work, as soon as that meeting happened and it didn't go the way I think the board wanted it to, they went and reopened the replacement folder and found Nick Waltemada and went for him, and that deal was done very quickly. And then you felt the noise change from Newcastle. You felt Newcastle almost willing the deal to happen, and they were welcoming. That was the encouragement Liverpool needed. The talks resumed and they were done pretty quickly. And I think I've said this on previous pods, that was always the likely case, that the actual agreement of the fee was probably the least of anybody's worries, because if the deal was going to be done, Newcastle needed to be happy with the overall situation, not just the money. The ballpark figure was around there. I think they were always going to be willing to take 130 million. They got 130 million because of £5 million in solidarity payments. Liverpool are paying 125. So, there's compromise on both sides. Both sides can say that they have had a bit of a win there. Whether you believe that or not is up to you. But Newcastle have got Liverpool to bid £5 million than they said that they actually would, but £15 million more than they actually did. Newcastle can say that they've taken a £20 million hit. So both teams have come to a disagreement, and ultimately I think there was a sense that the reintegration point after that Monday meeting was going to be really difficult and tedious, and maybe it was just the opportunity for a clean break when you got Yoane Wissa, who we'll come on to now, really keen to join Newcastle, going to all sorts of dodgy ways to try and make the move happen, like Isak did with Liverpool. And I have said openly that I don't condone that, but he drove up to Newcastle this morning. The deal was agreed and he's done his medical, and now Newcastle have two strikers that want to play for the club in Nick Waltemada and Yoane Wissa, replacing Alexander Isak, who's a world-class striker, obviously scored 26 goals last season in all competitions and had some brilliant memories. And I will touch on Isak's legacy, which has been tarnished obviously in a second, but he didn't want to be at the club. Now you've got two strikers, one who's a very, very exciting prospect and is expected to be one of the best players in the world over the next coming years and is Germany's big striking hope now, and a Premier League proven player in Yoane Wissa. So Newcastle are very happy with that business, I think, and overall their transfer business has been done to a high standard. I will do a big transfer window review either tomorrow or Wednesday, because obviously this video's come out a bit later. I don't necessarily want to do one in tomorrow morning because I want this one to breathe. I want this one to be quite watchable for some time. So I also asked for your questions, which we'll touch on in a little bit as well, but I do, just as I say, want to talk about Alexander Isak, and I know there's a lot of anger out there. I know he's been called a rat again this evening with a sign outside St James's Park, and I fully understand the anger. I always have. But he also was a key member of that team that won the Carabao Cup. I know lots of people have jokingly, morphed Will Osula's head on him. More on that in a second, as I say. As that picture of him with Virgil van Dijk, and pretended that it wasn't him who scored all those goals and everything. But he did score those goals. He is the main reason why Newcastle had such success last season. We can't get away from that. And he is also the biggest example of what the PIF project is about. The new owners came in, and their idea in the PSR world was to buy and sell for a profit and reinvest, and that was how they were going to build the club. And they haven't been able to do that. They haven't been good at selling. They've been forced into this position where they have to sell Isak, but it's a profit. They can reinvest that money. They have reinvested that money. The squad is much stronger. They can move on from this now. And it really shows, I think, I'll write a piece probably on this week about how Isak really does show the best of what this PIF project is about. World-class talented players coming in, building the club, taking the club to new heights, leading them to success, and then if they see fit, leaving for a profit, and everybody kind of wins. I know it doesn't feel like that, but it will eventually feel like that. I think that is my message, really. I know lots of people are really angry, and he's gone about it in a terrible way. He's really torched that legacy. He doesn't deserve a lot of the love that he got last season, but ultimately he did score that goal in the cup final. He did lead the club to success, and he has got them a massive profit, which has helped them usurp PSR probably for a while, and certainly those UEFA regulations. But again, more on that later. Quickly, just before we get into your questions, Will Osula, the surprise of the day, really. I mean, the fact that this also hasn't been announced as I sit and talk, so maybe this one won't go through. I don't know how, if this deal's been agreed or if it's going to work, but £30 million for Will Osula from Eintracht Frankfurt, and everybody, I think, fell off their chairs when they heard that, because that's such a good deal for Newcastle to be able to do. Similarly to Lloyd Kelly, a profit off the back of very little football, very little impact. His talent is obvious. I think he's got lots of raw ability, but his understanding of the game and his game intelligence just isn't there. And I said that on Sunday's video. It's been evident all the way through. There's been questions as to how far he can go, and I think Newcastle do see a future for him. As I say, at the moment, there's no sign of it actually getting done. But we'll obviously do more videos and talk about that, maybe further down the line, and I'll write about it, I'm sure, as well for Forbes. I'm just going to get on to a couple of your questions that were sort of brought out. I did ask for them when I was hoping to record a little bit earlier, so maybe some of them aren't quite as relevant as they were. But Carl has asked, are we sufficiently covered in midfield? Could we see an incoming number 10? Obviously, the window's shut, so the incoming number 10 isn't there. But a lot of the questions, I won't read out them all, but lots of them were around the lack of options up front if Osula goes, and the lack of creativity and options in midfield. I had said throughout the summer that I wanted Newcastle to sign a number 10, and it didn't need to be a really big star name, a really big stellar player. It could have been someone who's proven themselves at a lower level and wants to and can step up from Europe. I mentioned Martin Bačarina, who's a really exciting Croatian midfielder, seen as the new Modric in Croatia. That he's gone to, I think, Como now, and he would have been a really interesting signing, someone like that. And I do understand the feeling around that number 10, because I think Newcastle do need a little bit more creativity. I think we've seen that this season quite a lot. Sanjeev has asked, what do you think will define Isak's career at Liverpool? I think it will be the injuries and price tag. I think he will be a real success at Liverpool. I'm a huge believer in Alexander Isak as a footballer. I always have been. First read about him in World Soccer when he was 16, 17 at AIK. Followed his career since then. Got to know a couple of people around him, and who saw him grow up in Sweden. And that was primarily why I was so surprised that he did this. Lots of those character references that came back were positive and humble and chilled, and all of these things that you just didn't expect this to happen from Isak. How will his time at Liverpool be defined? I think it'll be defined by trophies. I think he'll be a massive success. The question is obviously around his injuries. Is he durable? But with Ekitike there, that might be a positive. There's lots of talk about how they play together, how Arne Slot keeps them both happy. But actually, maybe it suits Arne Slot to have them both and be able to chop and change and play one, bring the other on, like he had with Wilson in Newcastle a few years ago, without the style changing too much. So this will be a massive success for Liverpool. I do, unfortunately, for many Newcastle fans, I know that might not be the way you want to hear it, but obviously the injuries are a big factor, and they're a big thing here. Andrew Smith says, whilst it is sad to see the club bullied into a sale, this is the best outcome for Unity for the rest of the season. A united squad, 2 strikers, and the possibility of further growth for Osula, and it feels like Wolves will be a fresh start. I think that's the big thing. There was a really good piece in The Athletic by Chris Waff the other day, who said that Newcastle can't really start their season until the transfer window closes, and now that it's closed with Isak, there's no more conversations, even if he had stayed. And as I say, the reintegration was a little bit more complex by the time the noise around him changed. I think I was always for reintegration. I thought he would score goals, but it was far from guaranteed. I think that Wolves is a massive fresh start. I think Newcastle can go into that Wolves game knowing that that's all had a line drawn under it, and they can move on, and they've got quality in attack, proven Premier League goalscorer in Wissa, and a really exciting striker in Walter Marder. So I'm fully on board with Andrew's comment there. Liam says, take money and everything out of it. If we could do one deal, and I assume you would want a creative central midfielder like everybody else, who would your ideal player be to fit like that? Yeah, I think a midfielder would be ideal. If I'm taking money out of it and I'm trying to keep it realistic, semi-realistic, let's say, the player that I always wanted Newcastle to sign, if possible, would have been Morgan Gibbs-White. I think he's an absolutely wonderful player. I'm a huge, Eberechi Eze fan as well. He would have been great too in that left eight. I'm convinced of that too. But Morgan Gibbs-White was a player that Newcastle were linked with for a long time over the last couple of years, and I always wanted that deal to happen. That would have been my dream signing this summer. 60 million when he was nearly going to Spurs. I thought that's a deal that I really wanted Newcastle to do. I remember him tearing Newcastle apart at St James's on Boxing Day last season, and £60 million just in this current market for that, what he is, the right age that he is, the fact that he's going to play for England and being a shoe-in for most squads, and he's one of those players that adds depth to the already crazy numbers that they already have at number 10 at England. I just think he would have been a brilliant player in that creative role. Gives you different options. Can play as an 8, can play as a 10, can play out wide, predominantly as a 10, but that creativity, that ability to drag teams out of difficult situations, and his leadership, leading by example, I think would have been massive. So if I'm going to talk about that, I know it's not a realistic signing, I know it was never going to happen this summer, but Morgan Gibbs-White was always my favourite option for that sort of creative midfield berth. Just quickly before I go, I just want to say I think Liverpool have done a really good job on Newcastle this summer. This is where my frustration lies with Isak. Obviously, I'm very pleased that Newcastle got the strikers, and I'm very pleased Newcastle can draw a line under it. But to go to Newcastle in July and offer the opportunity to offer around £120 million informally, while also not entering the race for Ekitike, then take Ekitike and then buy Isak as well, has really done a number on Newcastle. They've made Newcastle look a bit weak, and that is a concern for me. I think this is worrying a little bit. I think somebody else commented this, that what's this going to look like for Newcastle in the future with if Sandro Tonali or Lewis Hall or Sino Livramento wants to go. You can say that they're not that type of player, but we all said the same thing about Alexander Isak. Is this a new precedent for football as well, with Wissa doing the same thing to come to Newcastle? Are we going to see more Instagram stories and players going on strike? It could be really, really dangerous. So I'm not very happy with the way that Newcastle have acted in this and the way that Newcastle have buckled at the end. I do understand why. I think the money's good and it's a good opportunity to move forward, but the way that it's played out, it's basically has given Liverpool and Alexander Isak what they want, and that isn't a good sign ultimately. Let me know in the comment section what you think on that as well. I'll be back with a full state of play and transfer window review. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you then.